Hello there. Today I'll be working on the Chris Wood Sews pattern in the envelope dress. This is an only $10 PDF, and what's really cool about this pattern is it's not actually a pattern. You will be making a one size option, or if you're above a size 14, she gives you directions for how to measure it out for yourself to make it a little bit larger or smaller if you're smaller than a size 0. So the fabric that you'll need is only 1.5 yards. So she explains all that really well right here. And she also lays out for you very clearly how to customize it. So if the pattern doesn't work for you and you need to make it a little bit larger or smaller, she explains that here. I'm making this for the first time and I'm just kind of hoping that the one size fits me, and we'll find out. I think it probably will. So first what I did was step 1 right here. She says to cut out a front and a back piece, and she's also explaining very clearly that she wants you to cut it along the selvage. So if you don't know what that term means, I'm going to show you on my fabric. So I'm using this fabric. It looks like this. And the selvage looks like this. So this is the part that when I went to the store, they didn't cut this. They cut it from the opposite end. So if I open it up, this is the selvage. And over here on this side, this is the cut end. So she wants your fabric to be facing this way before you cut it. For me, however, and that's also like to just save and conserve, so you're pretty much using every piece of fabric. But for me, I know that it's going to be a long flowy dress, and I didn't want my print to be facing this way. I want it to be facing this way. So I actually didn't do it along the selvage, which is why I have like scraps of fabric like this. But that's okay, because I'm going to use this fabric to make handbags or headbands and things like that. I like to be really resourceful. So at this point, I'm gonna show you next what to do after you cut out these two pieces. So it's pretty simple. You cut out one that's 27.5 inches, and then the other one is slightly smaller, 26.5. And then you're gonna cut this directly in half. And this side will be 13.75 inches, same thing for this side. So I want to show you what that looks like with my fabric. Alrighty, so there's one large piece for the back and two smaller pieces that you should have cut in half. And in this step, you're doing a zigzag pattern all the way around the sides and the top, but leaving the bottom open. And so if you have a serger, which I don't, you would use a serger, would be faster, but I did zigzag stitch all the way around. So here's what mine looks like. This is my back piece. It's all one piece. So I zigzagged all along here, all along the sides, and my bottom is still open. Because this is where eventually it'll be the bottom, and that's where I will create my hem according to how the length that I need it. And so I have this piece, this is my back piece, and then your front piece, I want to show you on the next page. I kind of just skipped ahead to that step because I think this step is going to be really simple. For a beginning sewer, I think I could have done this. So I've been sewing for a year now. I think I could have done this like within my first month of sewing. I wish this pattern was around because I was doing other patterns that were a lot harder. So thank you to Chris for making this pattern really easy for us beginners. Okay, so she right here in this picture, she's taking the two front pieces and piecing them together right sides together. So this is the wrong side right here. She has them two right sides together. So let me show you what that looks like with mine. Here are my right sides. So it's really inside out right now. And I matched them up all the way. So I pinned it along this side. I know you can't see it, but that's what I did. I pinned it. And then the next step after you pin it is, let's see, she says it right here. You mark 3/4 down. So right here, I took my ruler and I measured 3/4. That was 3/4 right there. And I put a little pin right here just so I can remember. You could even just do a little clip at the edge to mark that that's 3/4. And then from the 3/4 line, you measure down 13 inches. So this is gonna be the neckline right here. Okay, so then I took my measuring tape and I measured down 13 inches from that mark right here. This was where that first mark was that I made. Now I'm gonna measure down 13 inches and I'm gonna mark that as well. So you can mark it with a pin or clip it. Okay, and the reason why you see this is because I already cut the neck. I'm sorry, I should have showed you that step before. Okay, so imagine that this is all one strip. The neck has not been cut yet. You're gonna take it to the sewing machine and you're gonna sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Don't forget to back stitch here and don't forget to back stitch here. So you're gonna sew that. And then all of this is gonna be open because that's where the neckline is. And then you're gonna start sewing again that 1/2 inch seam allowance starting from here, that 13 inch mark that you made, sewing all the way down to the bottom of the fabric. Don't forget to back stitch right here at the bottom. Now, the 13 inches is for the neckline, right? And if, I don't know, if maybe you have a larger bust right here, you might want the neckline to go up a little bit. For me, because this is my first one I'm making, I'm just gonna go with the 13 and see if that works. So that way when I make the next one, I'll know if I need to raise or lower it a little bit. So once you've sewn, then what I did was I took a pair of scissors that I'm using for cutting my fabric. And this is what my fabric looked like before. So she doesn't really tell you the exact math for cutting the neckline, but she does give a pretty good illustration of what it should look like. And right here, to me, it's like a tiny crescent moon. So I took my scissors and I just kind of went for it. I didn't measure anything out, and I cut a tiny sliver. To me, it looks like a piece of biscotti. Have you ever had biscotti with coffee? It's about that length. And if I measured that, for me, I did about, it was a little bit over an inch. So I went in about an inch and I trimmed it along. Let me take out the pins so we can see what it looks like when I open it up. Nice. So if I look at her example, there's a hole, like an oval shaped hole, and it looks like a V-neck right here too. That's pretty much what mine looks like. So this is the top and this is the bottom. I'm sorry, I know it's backwards right now for you. Okay, and then the next step, let's see what she's asking us to do. All right, now you're gonna flip it over to the back side and you're gonna get your iron and you're going to sew and press the seam allowance open. So I just did that. I ironed it and I sewed all of my seam allowance open so it's flat like this, because now I'm gonna add a top stitch. So a top stitch means that you're not sewing underneath anymore, you're sewing right on top. And she asks you to sew 3/8 from the seam on both sides. So I'm gonna find 3/8 on my sewing machine, or I could even mark it. So that's about 3/8. It's very close to the seam line. And you're gonna top stitch a straight line here and on this side. That way, well, one purpose I think is like a decorative piece. It looks really pretty, but also you're going to sew this down as well. So you're your seam allowance is going to get sewn closed when you do that. So you do it for this little top part, and then start again right here. And you're going to top stitch that 3/8 seam allowance all the way down on one side, and then I'll do it all the way down on the other side. And so when it's finished, you should see 2 straight lines running parallel to each other. Let's see what that looks like. As I'm getting ready to sew that top stitch, I'm always gonna put my hand underneath the dress just to feel the seam allowance that's on the inside. And I'm just feeling and making sure that underneath that seam allowance is still laying flat and that I'm catching it as I'm sewing on top, because I'm trying to sew it down into the dress so it doesn't move all apart. So just always use 2 hands and go slowly down to make sure that you're catching that. I finished sewing my top seam. Right at the top of the neck, you should be able to see 2 straight parallel lines. It's sort of like an ivory color that I did on top. And then I left the neck hole open, so none of that should be sewed yet. And I also finished the top stitch right along here. It runs all the way down the front. Okay, now next step, I'm gonna find my back piece. And I know that this is the bottom because the edges look like this and I haven't zigzagged them closed. So I'm gonna match the top, that's my opposite side, and I'm gonna do right sides facing. So this is my right side and this is my right side of the fabric. I'm gonna match them like this, and I'm gonna pin those seams right here along that neckline. So I'm gonna pin it all here, and once that's all pinned closed, we'll do, let's see, what does it say to do? You're gonna sew across that top edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then when you finish that seam allowance, you're gonna flip it and do a top stitch, just like we did right now. We just did a top stitch with a 3-inch seam allowance. So it'll look similar to that line that was running down the middle that you just did. So you're gonna do that same thing for the top. I sewed that top at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and before I top stitch, I forgot to mention, instead of opening up the seam line like this, you're going to iron the seam line to the back of the dress. So I'm gonna check, oh, here's the hole, this is the front of the dress. I'm gonna iron it to the back this way. And then once I iron it to the back, it should look something like this. The seam is going to be facing back that way. Then when I open it up on the reverse side, on the inside, I'm going to top stitch along this side. And I'm top stitching on this side again because I'm going to make sure that this bulk right here stays down. So that's where you're top stitching, 3/8 of an inch on this side. I'm not going to do it on that side. I mean, unless you wanted to do 2 decorative lines along the way down too, but I'm just gonna do 1 top stitch on this side. After you sew the shoulder seams, this is what it will look like. So I did a top stitch, and then you'll see that when you actually put it on, that neckline is almost like a tiny V-neck in the back as well. So this is the back of the dress. And then when I turn it to the front, this is what the front will look like. The style to me is very similar to a wapil. So in Mexico and probably a lot of other Latin American countries, women in my family wore dresses like this, just real loose and comfortable. So now we're on step 4, sewing the side seams and also prepping the armhole. So I'm gonna go through this myself and see if 8 inches is the right amount of armhole for me. And right here, she gives you a really great explanation of what you need to do and what I'm gonna do right now for figuring out if 8 inches works for my armhole. I might need to make it a tiny bit bigger, so I'll do that and I'll come back with my measurements. I just measured my bicep, so I'm following these directions right here just to customize my armholes. She's suggesting 8 inches if you're doing the one size. Although I am doing the one size, I just wanted to check. So my bicep is 11.5 inches. And then I followed her directions right here. I added 3 inches to give room for movement. And so that brought me to 14.5. And then I divided it by 2. So if I wanted to customize my armholes, I should technically do 7.25, which to me is like really close to 8. So I'm gonna do, and usually when I wear clothes, the armholes are pretty big on me. So I'm gonna do 7.5 right here. So I have my my dress laid out right here. Actually, I should turn it this way for you because it's facing me now. It should be facing you. Okay, so I have, this is the top of my dress, and here's where my neck opening starts right here. So I'm gonna take my measuring tape and measure where my seam is gonna start. So over here, I'm gonna find 7.5. For me, it's 7.5. For you, it might be 8 if you're doing the one size. And so I'm just gonna measure down 7.5. And I'm gonna mark it with a tiny clip. So I'm just gonna make a little notch right there. So that way I know this is where I'm gonna start sewing down for the seam. This is where my armholes are gonna be opening. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. And then she says after you've done that, you're going to stitch a side seam at 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm gonna work on that now. I just finished my seam all along these edges. I stitched 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way down to the bottom. These are my armholes now. And they're ready to be top stitched. So they're folded over right now, 1/2 inch. This is, I have it inside out right now, so right sides are facing. I folded over 1/2 inch, and now I'm on step 5 right here. So because this is blank, I know that this is the right side. So she's saying with the right side up, you're gonna top stitch. I'm gonna make a straight line right here and then sew all the way around. And I'm basically just sewing down this 1/2 inch right here. So I'm gonna make that straight line right here and then sew all the way around. But first I have to turn this right side out. So I have to flip it out because it's supposed to be a top stitch. So I'm gonna work on that. Here is my armhole. I'm at the very beginning step where she says sew a straight line at the bottom, and then I'm gonna curve around with 3/8 seam allowance. I just wanted to remind you, because I had to remind myself as a beginning sewer, the seam that runs all along here that you just sewed, don't forget to press iron the seams open. So the inside should look like this. I didn't actually do that yet. I'm gonna do it right after I'm done with the armhole. So if you press that open, which I forgot to do that, I'm gonna do that right after, but right now I just double checked. I went underneath the armhole to make sure that it's pressed open right here, so that way when I sew that straight line, it's sewing down the whole inside of that seam. So I'm gonna do that first and then go 3/8 all the way around the armhole. My armholes are finished. All of my side seams are pressed open. This is what the inside of the armhole looks like. And then the outside is nice and clean with a 3/8 seam allowance. Now I'm on the final step, working on the hemline of the dress. So we just finished this. Oops. Hemming, here we are, step 6. So she suggests, let's see, keep in mind that the front hangs higher than the back, and I've tried it on and I felt that and noticed that. And so she says mark your desired length at the front midpoint. So what I did was I tried it on, and it's very long for me because I'm only 5'1". So I'm hemming mine up, let's see, about 4.5 inches. So what I'm gonna do, I already had pinned it, 4.5 inches. I also decided to do the split seam. So when we sew those side seams, she suggests sewing all the way down to the bottom. I sewed up to, let's see, I measured up 7 inches. So you could see right here that I left this part open because I want to do a little bit of a split seam right here. So what I'm going to do is, now that I'm working on the hem, is I'm going to fold this under, and that's going to be my hem right there. I could fold it, so this was about 4.5. I could just fold it like that and have a really wide seam on the bottom, or wide hem on the bottom, but I think I want it to be a little bit less, so I'll probably fold it about there and then stitch that closed, and so I'll have a seam line right about here. So I'm going to work on that. It's just slightly different right here because I have the split seam. So when I'm sewing, I'm going to start here, go all the way around the front side, stop, and then work on the back side. So my back side hem is going to be slightly longer, so that way when that side seam is open, the front is a little bit shorter than the back. But if you want to keep it simple, don't do a split like that. Just sew it all the way down to the end and work on your hemline. The hem is finished. This is what it looks like close up. This is what my side split looks like. Let's turn it inside out to